And here's the other question that I hear a lot is, well, why do gay people need to get married when all they have to do is go to a lawyer and draw up a power of attorney for whatever?
Well, the answer to that, there's a couple of answers to that. One of them is that I would urge anyone who thinks that a lawyer is an easy answer to all of the problems that life may bring to you legally should try it sometime and find out how expensive it will be to get a moment of that lawyer's time, how expensive it will be to draft up all of the documents that you will need to draft up. And at the end of the day, when you've done thousands, maybe tens of thousands of dollars worth of lawyers' fees, at the end of the day, you still won't have all of the protections that people who are married have, because lawyers can't, those are private agreements. They have no special status in the law, and so lawyers can't, for example, make a person's inheritance through Social Security or disability available to a person who's married. Lawyers can't exempt you from having to testify at a trial against your life partner. There are lots of things, 515 examples in Minnesota law alone of things that lawyers just aren't going to be able to do for you.
Really? Like what?
Well, the ones I just mentioned. I'll give you a good example of this. If you live with a same-sex partner and you can't get married, and one of you dies and transfers their half of the ownership in the home to you, that is considered a gift for purposes of taxation. So let's say your home is worth $300,000 and each of you has $150,000 stake. That partner dies, you have $150,000 in income for tax purposes that you're going to have to pay on your next tax bill. If you're married, you get an exemption in the law. That does not count as a gift for you. You can own the house together and you've not been given the gift of your house. So people can actually be forced out of their homes because they cannot afford to pay taxes, and those taxes are imposed on them because they can't get married. You have a child.
The same thing happens to children too. You know, your parents die and there's so many taxes that.
That's
yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And think what happens when, for example, two people of the same sex who can't get married are raising a child together. Maybe only one of them is the legal parent of that child, but both of them put their time and effort and energy into raising the child and are the only parents that child has ever known. If their relationship ends and there's no marriage between the two, a court could declare that the parent who is not the formal legal parent has no rights in the child and has no responsibilities to help child support. That's a horrible thing to happen to a child who's only known those two parents. And we have thousands of those kids being raised in the state. What do we say to them? Why do we prohibit their parents from having a legal relationship that will enable their families to have some protection in the law? For what? So that somebody can say this is a sacrament? That can't be the answer.
I know I hear a lot too that I think gay people should be able to get married to each other because they should be just as unhappy as I am. And they talk, personally I'm not married, but they, and which I just laugh and yeah, there's some truth in that.
Well, there's something too, because as soon as you get gay marriage, you will have divorces and
right.
Everybody gets to experience the joys of divorce law. There's a kind of a wry humor about that. I think what I'd say is, making choices in life does mean you take on responsibilities. And if you take on the responsibility of marriage, you have to recognize you are committing to something in the law and there are consequences to it. And I think those are consequences that some people will not want to take on, so they should have the choice not to marry. Nobody should be forced to marry. But if they want to take them on, we should let them.
Okay, so we have it on the ballot in November. There's going to be millions and millions and millions of dollars in advertising on both sides. You're going to have to go out all across the state of Minnesota and convince basically a supermajority to approve this. How are you going to do that?
Well, the elements of a campaign are many. There is an element of the campaign that will involve getting out the right message, that this is not a threat to liberty, this is an enhancement of liberty, this is stabilizing and so forth. There's an element to the campaign that will involve raising money to do everything else you need to do. There's an element of the campaign that will be organizing volunteers and going into the field and talking to people, having
You're not going to
conversations.
knock at my door, are you?
You know, I can't promise you that we're not, but I'll tell you what, if you tell them that you talked to me and you're already on board, they'll leave. They'll leave.
I fight with the Sierra Club at least once a week on my doorstep.
So I hope I hope they do knock at your door, and because I want to get everybody covered in Minnesota. I don't think we should take any vote for granted, because I do not believe that the people who traditionally oppose gay marriage should necessarily support this amendment. It's already the law in Minnesota that you can't get married. It's already the law that we don't recognize your marriage from out of state. How many times do we need to lock that door or shut that door in people's faces?
Well, a lot of people say, hey, the courts will change it.
Well, there's always the possibility of, that you might fear a court doing something. What I would say about that is a couple of things. I don't think we should be wary of changing the Constitution in anticipation of possible future court decisions. When we actually have a court decision, or when we're close to one, we could revisit the issue. We're nowhere close to that in Minnesota. We don't have any decision in Minnesota in favor of gay marriage. The Minnesota Supreme Court spoke to this issue 40 years ago and rejected the claim. I think most people who are familiar with the courts in Minnesota do not believe that ultimately we're going to have a court-mandated marriage. So I think the fear is exaggerated, but let's suppose you thought there was a fear. If you thought that was the reason to pass this amendment, then you would pass an amendment that said it's up to the legislature to define marriage. It's not anybody else's. The courts can't get involved. That's not what this amendment is. This amendment prohibits the people from speaking through their legislative representatives to change the understanding and allow same-sex couples to wed. So this amendment is a much broader effort than that. It's shutting off future generations from looking at this issue afresh, weighing the evidence, and deciding for themselves. Instead, they're going to have to go back through a constitutional amendment process. That's not right for us to shut off their options on this issue. So I think the fears are exaggerated, and to the extent that the fears of courts have any justification, this amendment is not the answer to that perceived problem.
I just predict that this is going to get so ugly. So the rhetoric and I just think it's going to just get so ugly.
It's a possibility, and I want to avoid it. And I think it is the responsibility of advocates on both sides to say it should be possible to have a civil, rational, reasonable discussion of this issue. And I think there have been violations of that principle on both sides in the past in other places. And I think we can conduct a better debate than that in Minnesota. And I have some faith that we will. It's not to say there won't be individuals on either side, but I think as long as we respect each other and we conduct a civil discussion and emphasize the importance of doing so, we can make this a better discussion. And I'll say something else about it. If we have a civil, rational discussion about this issue in which we should just talk about the facts and talk about the evidence and consider the arguments, I think those who oppose the amendment win. I don't think we win shouting matches, but I think we win a deliberate, thoughtful discussion on this issue.
Okay, now I want you to look in the camera and speak to the voters. Tell them how they should cast their ballot and why.
Well, I urge Minnesotans to vote no on this amendment in the November election, and I do so for a couple of reasons. One is that this amendment does nothing to advance the cause of individual liberty and limited government. The other is that it deprives families in Minnesota of protection in the law that they need. And the third is that marriage is a good thing, and so we ought to encourage people actually to get married to enhance stability in our society. And then finally, we can do all of this. We can vote no on this amendment without in any way harming any person's religious liberty. We must protect religious liberty, and we have done so and will do so in this state, even when this amendment is defeated. So I hope that Minnesotans will vote no.
That was great. Thank you so much for the interview today. I really enjoyed it. Well, we're out of time. If you find yourself agreeing with our guest, you might be a libertarian. To find out, take the world's smallest quiz at www.theadvocates.org. Remember, Libertarian Viewpoint brings you the non-government, liberty-based solutions that other media refuse to tell you about. Liberty works, and it's always the best choice. If anyone in government can prove otherwise, I challenge them to speak up. To view past shows, search YouTube using Libertarian Viewpoint. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for other shows of Libertarian Viewpoint.